They will share good practices and hopefully spark inspiration. So back to you, Lina.
Thank you so much, Merit. Thank you so much. And just to build up on what Merit said, actually the main reason behind this webinar is that we wanted to understand more and to hear directly from women journalists about their experiences, the challenges that they face, and what kind of recommendations do they have for organizations like Climate Tracker, Hivos, and others. And as Merit mentioned, we have, in order to understand what we did, how we can better conduct journalism programs in Africa, we asked Moneera Yassien to conduct an evaluation study. And Moneera Yassien is a development consultant from Sudan and the founder of AMNA organization that works on addressing gender-based violence in Sudan. Moneera is currently doing her master's in international development at the Paris School for International Affairs, Sciences Po, and she will be sharing with us the findings of her evaluation study on the Climate Tracker Journalism Fellowship Program and also the recommendation that she has. So Moneera, I'll hand it over to you.
Hello everyone, thank you so much Lina and Merit for the introduction. I'm very happy to be here with you, and I'm also very honored to be part of such an amazing list of women who are working on changing the world. It's a real honor for me. Allow me to share my screen so I can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, and can you see it? Yep. How about now? Is that better? Okay. Yeah, so as I mentioned, I'm very happy to be here with you. And what I'm going to be, as Lina Merit mentioned, that I was hired by Climate Tracker to conduct a short study and try to evaluate the process of the selection for the Sustainable Energy for All Fellowship in Africa. And it was a very specific task because I was trying to understand how gender was integrated in throughout the process and throughout the fellowship, and why did we have so many like very little number of women applying for this fellowship, and which by default resulted in a small number of women participating in the actual fellowship. So what I'm going to be introducing, what I will introduce today is the findings and sort of the recommendation, the general ones, because we also have to keep in mind that this is a very specific task for a very specific project, but in the way that this has been done, and the findings can be generalized and start the conversation. Yeah, so what happened exactly and what methodology was followed? I was looking, we used a gender integration approach to try to understand how gender was integrated throughout the project cycle. So starting from the design until the monitoring and evaluation, what has happened in there that may has resulted in women not applying. And then and how it was presented is that we tried to look what has been done, and also try to evaluate what could have been done better. And that has happened through interviews with participants, with applicants, with Climate Tracker staff, review of project document, and also secondary resources, which has conducted research in similar subjects. So the general findings that can be generalized maybe for for other projects and for larger audience is that the field of environmental journalism, and specifically sustainable energy field, is a men-dominated field in Africa, and that was demonstrated by the women who has been working in that field, been functioning in that field, and this is the finding. Also, we have one of the findings that we have the opportunity to produce research and piloting in understanding gender parades in the field of environmental journalism. There hasn't been so many studies on that field, and specifically in Africa. So through research and training, we can better understand this gender parity. The recommendation that came out of this project is that first, there's an opportunity for training on gender integration programming for the staff. So either for Climate Tracker, for Hivos, or for any other organization, giving training for our staff on what gender integration means in programming is important. And to elaborate more on this, gender integration programming is concerned with looking at how whatever we're working on and is affecting women, men, boys, and girls, and how they are affecting them differently. So we can have a project and design responses for the different challenges. So we cannot just assume that we are all one and design our projects based on that. Second, we need to utilize resources. Gender integration is a costly, it's not costly, but it requires for sure extra additional cost that we need to take, and it's also required willingness. So and I really thank Hivos and Climate Tracker for doing that, because the first step is actually willingness to understand what gender integration is and understand how our projects are affecting women and men and boys and girls differently. And that could be done through situation and analysis. Just go to the field, understand what's happening, ask questions, ask men and women and boys and girls how this is affecting you, and so we can say so we can have evidence that they are being affected differently, and this is what we need to do. Also, another tool is gender analysis, which is very specific for gender. So we see there are different modules of there are different gender analysis tools. But mainly it looks at every aspect that so social, government, policies, family, individuality, all these aspects, and how and start asking questions, which, for example, in this case related to women environmental journalists, and then ask them as an individual, what is it like for you to be a female journalist, how your society look at you, what opportunities do you have in the society, what are the policies that support you or is constraining you. So these are different ways to do it, and through these tools we can highlight the gender gaps. Also, another way is another recommendation that they came out with is there are so many useful gender marker tools, which basically very simple tools that help us in evaluating the effect of our project. Is it gender transformative? Are we trying to challenge the existing gender varieties? Is it responsive? It consider gender, but it may not challenge it that well. Is it sensitive? We just think about, which means that we just think about gender. We know there is different, but we don't act upon it. Or it could be also negative for gender. May be harming women, or if by this project, if we conduct it the way we do. Also, one other important recommendation was to extract gender and age segregated data, which means that which simply means we collect data about number of women who participated, number of men who participated, and their demographics, their age, where they are from, do they live in urban areas, do they live in cities, do they live in urban areas or in suburbs, how educated they are. And we could even go, so we can have a pool of data that's very intersectional, and it helps us understand how like the life of the person that you're working with. And also, one other condition was to capitalize on the network of African women journalists, because Climate Tracker has been working for long with journalists in Africa, and specifically women journalists. So there we already have an existing network of women who we can bring together. And actually, this webinar is was one of the outcomes of this specific recommendation, just to come together and discuss the challenges that we're facing as women, the challenges that the women journalists and environment journalists are facing, and bring it up to the surface and just amplify the voices of these women and of their challenges. Because if we don't do, then no one, like, it's not going to be here, just not going to be recognized. And it's also an opportunity to create role models. for other young women who are aspiring to be environmental journalists. And it's also an opportunity to build partnerships. So with existing organization who are already working with African women journalists, and just come all of us together and discuss what type of challenges, so we can our solutions can be a response for real challenges. Another recommendation was to design a gender integration in journalism training. So it's not just enough to say that we are bringing women to, like, we are empowering African women journalists and in the field of environment. It's also important to see this gender gaps and assess it in the writings while we're writing our blogs, writing articles, conducting research. How can we integrate gender in that field? Because I believe this if we do so, we will highlight the challenges that are facing women in the field of energies in general, and in the field of environment in general, and in the field of sustainable energy. And that will also encourage other women to feel that they relate to this issue. And as journalists, it's their duty and it's their role to write about this and tell the world about these specific issues. Yeah, so this is it for me. I'm looking forward to continue the discussion and to hear from all the amazing women and who we're having today. Yeah, I'll hand it back to you, Lina.
Thank you so much, Moneera. Okay, it'd be great if you can close the presentation. Okay, thank you so much. And again, I just want to emphasize on the fact that this webinar was actually one of the outcomes of the evaluation study that Moneera conducted. And we at Climate Tracker hope that this webinar will just be the start of a process that will eventually change the way we look at programs in the future and lead to better women integration in our future programs, but also a chance for other international organizations working on this field or other relevant field to better reflect on what how they're working and what they can do better moving forward. So in order to build up on what Moneera said, we want to hear directly from some of the participants in a program that Moneera evaluated. So I'm really happy and honored to have with us today two amazing journalists. We have with us Diana, who is a freelance journalist based in Uganda. She's passionate about environmental issues and writes on climate change, renewable energy, food security, human rights. Her work has been published by Equal Times, Africa Business Magazine, and Earth Journalism Network. We're also going to be joined by Jennifer, who is a freelance investigative journalist and has built quite a reputation in journalism in Nigeria by working for some of the country's prestigious media firms, such as the Pointer newspaper, Delta State Broadcast, and the International Center for Investigative Reporting. So Diana and Jennifer, I'm really happy to have you, and they're both going to be discussing together the challenges that they face as women journalists in their countries and some of the recommendations that they have, as well as reflecting on their experience as being part of the Climate Tracker Fellowship. So, and I also want to remind people that after this panel discussion, we'll be accepting the first round of questions. So if you have any question, you can start typing it in the chat box. So now, Diana and Jennifer, I'll hand it to you. Jennifer, I think you can start since you have a presentation.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm happy to be here today. Okay, let's see if we can get the video. Okay, so based on the reporting process with Climate Tracker in the past few months, I think I'm going to be presenting a few of the challenges that face journalists, women journalists, but I'll be limiting it to just the Nigerian female journalists because I feel like it's not, I can't speak for all female journalists right now. And at the same time, okay, let me just bring this up so I can share. All right, I'm sorry. Okay, all right. So one of the first challenges that I think militates environmental reporting in Africa, one of them, I think it's stereotypes in the media. in this way, women have been actually relegated to reporting stories that have to do on the soft bit. So it's assumed that in a newsroom, a woman can report probably human rights issues or arts and fashion. And the idea of a woman reporting environmental issue or actually energy issue, often it's not in the picture. And that's one of the militating rules for female journalists. And also the second challenge here is lack or limited access to fund, mentorship, and career guidance. There's almost absolutely no networking opportunity for female environmental journalists in Nigeria and probably in Africa, except from organizations that actually are female targeted, say Warner Data, just for the few that I know that are in Nigeria and Kenya. Very few organizations actually invest, or there are actually very limited opportunities for women to do environmental story that targets women particularly. And then the next issue is there's a limitation or absolute lack of data entirely. And when it has to do with environmental issue, some of these issues they are opaque. And when it's focused on the energy sector, it's a whole different ballgame, because the access to data is limited, especially in the public domain. So you have to make lots of calls, you have to send lots of FOI to see if you can have access to this information. And what it does is that it limits the delivery process all the time. And also it's one of the setback in reporting energy issues or environmental issues that women, but although it's actually awesome to note that we should also know that this issue is not specific to women alone. I think the issue of data or the lack of it is an issue that every reporter actually experiences. And then the next point is there's a limitation of women when you are doing reports, especially if it's on environmental issues. The sources are limited. You have more of the male folks giving you comments or trying to, or they are actually the ones that you might have to do the interviews with. You go to the Ministry of Energy, for instance, it's mostly men that you see handling those positions. And another thing is because the faces of women, they're actually it's more relatable to speak with them when it has to do with climate issues. It's a challenge when the story or when the narrative doesn't bring in these people that we're talking about. So that's one of the challenges. That's just few of them. I think, so let's see, what can be done about it? So I think what can be done is the opposite of everything that is being done. This is, there should be reporting opportunities and funding for female journalists in Nigeria and Africa generally. So, and when I say that, I don't mean just for environmental reporters now, but generally, and especially if it has to do with women. But since we're talking about environmental reporters, I think the absence of this networking or the opportunity for them to do more stories on environment, it's actually a militating factor. So if we could reverse that, that would be awesome. It would give more women the room to do more stories. And then you have to look at with the visibility aspect of it. So if there's a shift to giving more women more journalistic roles to cover environmental issue, I think that would be really, really awesome. Capacity building and mentorship program. I think that's one of the amazing things about the Climate Tracker Fellowship, the Energy Reporting Fellowship. One thing it has availed is that it has given one of the top-notch mentorship programs, especially when it has to do with reporting climate issues. So if there's a follow-up, if there are programs, if there are fellowships that not just give the fund, but also bring in this mentorship plans on board, that would be really amazing. And then networking and collaboration. So the networking part now is finding a way, and it's still like it's an integration of the previous point. So if there are fellowships, then we can actually build networks that bring women together. And then what this will do is that it will foster collaborations for female journalists to do stories both within their own present country and other country also. So I think this is what can be done, and that's it. And I actually look forward to hearing from Diana also. I just have 5 minutes. So thank you everyone for that time.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Diana, would you like to take over?
Thank you so much, Jennifer. You talked about some of the challenges I was going to also mention. So thank you for this opportunity. Thank you to everyone who's joining us for this. Oh my God, Jennifer.
Oh, I'm sorry then.
Yes. Yes. So thank you everyone who's joining us for this necessary conversation we are having today. So my name is Diane Terema. As introduced, I'm a freelance journalist based in Uganda. I've been a freelance writer for the past 5 years. And one of the reasons anyway I became a freelance journalist here in Uganda was because of some of these challenges we face as female journalists. And I was also among the fellows from Climate Tracker's program, Sustainable Energy Fellowship Program. It was really an amazing experience for me. I got to learn a lot of new things. We were paired up with very good mentors. My mentor was Santiago from Climate Tracker. I learned a lot in terms of skills in investigative reporting on energy and climate change issues. It was a great experience for me. Now back to the main topic, the challenges we face as women journalists. And like Jennifer says, I'll speak from a personal experience. I can't talk for all the women in Africa. I can only talk about my experience. And one of the challenges I have faced has been before becoming a freelance journalist. I was working with some media houses here in Uganda as full-time staff. And one of the challenges I faced was the fact that some newsrooms can really be discriminative in a way that are discriminative, and of course also the stereotyping that women really, we cover soft news and the hard news is for the men. And I'm a print journalist, and I'd find that most of my editors are more interested in the men covering the hard news, the politics of the day, what is happening today. Let the men go and cover political stories, and then I'd find that for us, the women are more into feature stories, and yet I believe the hard news is equally no, the feature stories are equally as important as the hard news. For example, a topic on let me say female genital mutilation is as important as the politics of the day. So and then yes, I found that that was one of the challenges. And then also the fact that some of these working environments are not as flexible for us, especially the women. There are times you want to, for example, work from home, and even when you talk to your editor, you find the editor could respond and say it's okay, but in actual sense, they prefer that you're at office. If you're not at office or in the field, then you're not working. So, and yet sometimes, as we know, that work-life balance can be a bit tough and challenges and challenging, and you find that sometimes you really want to work from home, or maybe you have a sick child and you feel you really need to work from home that day. So this was also a challenge for me. And then also lack of child-friendly workspaces. First of all, I once worked for a media company where you're given 2 months 2 months maternity leave. You can imagine 2 months. And then, and sometimes the 2 months is, well, you take it or leave it. We can always hire some other people to come in. So it's a take it or leave it. And then even after the 2 months, you find this workspace is not child friendly. You can't come over with your child after that. You do not have a nursery where you can keep checking on your child from. So this was also quite a challenge when I worked for that specific place. And then also the poor pay stroke unequal pay. So of course, poor pay here in Uganda affects us, both female and male journalists, but women are mostly affected. This is an issue. This is a challenge that disproportionately affects women. So and it doesn't help that in most cases the women are the ones that are doing the feature stories, the softer news, and you feel that you are dispensable. I will tell you for a fact that most of the journalists that have had to be laid off or because of COVID-19, most of them are female journalists, and yes, this remains a challenge for us. And then the other thing is harassment at work. You'll deal with sexual harassment from your superiors at work, from your co-workers, from sources. Yes, this is a challenge across. And then also sexualization. There is a time I had to cover a story at Uganda's Parliament of Uganda, and I was putting on a skirt that was just above the knees, and I couldn't get in. I was denied entrance into Parliament because apparently I wasn't dressed appropriately. So, but then I also found out that the reason why they do not allow us in dressed up like that is because you're going to entice the legislators. You're not appropriately dressed. So it's funny. And then also you can't just go and do a random street story on the streets when you're dressed up like that in a certain way as a female journalist, because you'll face harassment. You'll be ogled by boda men, by Okada men. So this is also a challenge. So if there's a breaking story on the streets that you need to go and cover, you'll find that your male counterparts will just run off and cover the story because they're appropriately dressed. It's easy for them. You have to think about a lot of all these things. You have to think about, how am I dressed? How am I going to look like? Am I not going to get funny stares from people? All these things are in your head, and yet you have to cover this story. So this is also a challenge for us as female journalists. So yes, those are some of the challenges I can highlight. And then what can be done? Actually, just like Jennifer said, I'm thinking working with women journalist groups in Africa would be very good for Climate Tracker, because there are several organizations, women journalism organizations, that Climate Tracker can work with to circulate these opportunities so that they are able to reach more female journalists in Africa, and also encouraging women to apply for these opportunities. I'll tell you something. Every time I'm going to apply for an opportunity and I see something like women are encouraged to apply, somehow it usually motivates me to apply for that opportunity. And also organizing women-specific trainings on energy access for female journalists in Africa. Thank you. That's my submission.
Thank you so much, Diana. That was very interesting, and these are really interesting stories to know, and I really appreciate your recommendations. We do have some questions received over email. So someone is asking Jennifer, since you are an investigative journalist and that is known as a very difficult field, particularly in Africa, can you share some examples of the challenges that you faced just because of the fact that you were a woman journalist, investigative journalist?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, so can you give us examples of some of the challenges that you face while you're conducting investigative journalism?
Okay. As a as a female journalist, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I think one of the setbacks is the fact that, first of all, people don't expect that you are a woman journalist. That's the first thing. You're like a woman and you're a journalist, and you are doing what you're doing, which is investigations. And also, if we're bringing it down now, the challenges would also come down to access, like I said, of data. Do you understand? Like there is no data available actually to maybe support what I'm writing about or what I'm talking about. And also my year of experience, actually. So people hamper or that, or they just emphasize on it. Okay, we know you're a journalist, but how long have you practiced journalist? Or how long have you been in journalism, so that way I can know if you're capable or if you're experienced enough to handle this issue. And I don't think it's a question that they would ask, say, a male counterpart or a male colleague. So that's one of the problems that I think I've experienced, the year of experience. Oh, you're just a greenhorn, or you've not been there for a long time, or you're supposed to be reporting ads. You know, those are actually some snide remarks, but I don't think it's actually cool. That's one of the challenges that I faced. And also, actually, there was actually this one that happened when I went for an interview in one of the government organizations here. And that was when I was doing my 1 year mandatory NYC experience. That's National Youth Corps Service. It's actually mandatory here. You have to do it. But the thing is, I was already a working journalist while I was doing this. But on getting there, because I was an NYC Corps member, I didn't have the opportunity, or I wasn't given the opportunity to meet with the director, the person I wanted to speak to. Unfortunately, I was sent back to my office in the most rudest way after I spent like 2 or 3 hours waiting. So I think one of the main things that have limited me mostly is people assuming that I'm a female one, and also that I don't have enough experience, and also that the field I'm reporting should be a field that is exclusive for male. So that's one thing. So you hear energy, they're like, do you know anything you're talking about? It's technical. Can you handle it? And like I said before, the lack of fund is a problem, because there are actually environmental stories that I'd pitched before, even to my previous organizations where I'd worked before and other people. And when they look at it, they're like, we can't fund this. And because you're also a woman, we don't think you can do this. I mean, they don't come out expressly to say it to you, but it's quite painful when you find that other people that might have asked for the same opportunity or probably pitched a different kind of idea get access to do stories like that. So that's a militating deal, and that's why Climate Tracker actually has been, like I said, amongst the few, apart from one other that have given women the opportunity to do stories. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And before we move on to the second presentation session, I would just like to ask Diana this question. So one of our guests, Iman from Tunisia, is asking, Do you think the lack of women involvement in climate reporting is a question of lack of trainings, or is it more related to social and political norms? So Diane, can you maybe briefly tell us your opinion on this?
Yes, to some extent, also the social and political norms play a role, but also the lack of these opportunities specific to women, these trainings specific to women also plays a much bigger role in this, because I'll tell you for a fact that for me, the climate tracker training was the first for me, or was the first training for me, because, and also I've not seen trainings that are specifically designed for women on climate change, on renewable energy reporting. So I think if we had more of those, then we would have more female reporters on energy, more female reporters reporting on climate change.
Thank you so much, Diana, and thank you so much, Jennifer. This was really interesting to hear, and we really appreciate your recommendations and sharing the challenges that you face with us, as well as your personal stories. Thank you again so much. So moving on to our next part is we wanted to also reflect on success stories, because we were discussing challenges, but we also want to reflect on the fact that some women do make it, and there are some success stories out there. So we're really happy and pleasure to have with us today one of our Climate Tracker fellows, Janet, who's an environmental journalist from Kenya and has worked for several media outlets, including Baraka FM, the German press agency. She has received grants by the Earth Journalism Network and InfoNile. She's also currently pursuing her master's in media and international development at the University of East Anglia as a Chevening scholar. So Janet, I'm really happy to have you here with us today, and I would like to pass it to you.
Thank you so much, Lena, for having me here. It's such an honor to speak at such an event that's targeting women, because I'm also a woman journalist, and most of the challenges they're speaking about is challenges that I've gone through. It's not challenges that can be solved with the snap of a finger or with just one. We need a lot of lobbying and a lot of pushing, trying to push for change. So thank you so much. And when I've had someone talk about women journalists losing their jobs due to the effects of COVID-19. And I would say, like, this is very real for me, because you find that the media incomes for the media houses are shrinking. So you find that most media houses are allocating very little budgets to certain such kind of stories. So you find, like, for an environment journalist, you have to go to, like, you have to have a bigger budget, because you need, like, to travel to a far-flung place, and the editor cannot allocate such a budget for you. So I'd challenge some of the organizations like Hivos, like Climate Tracker, when you're training these journalists, also consider that the media houses, the income for the media houses are shrinking. For me, I was able to make it as a journalist because I used to double up as a journalist and as an editor at the same time. So my stories required very little editing from the editor who was above me. That is at Baraka FM. But in some media houses that I work for, like the German press agency, the stories had to go through several levels of editing. So there was also a challenge involved in that. And also, I think that this aspect of just training women journalists or just training journalists and not training the editors, it creates some sort of like there is some sort of a gap, because the journalist understands what he or she is writing about, and he's going to write it very well. But when she goes to take that story to the editor tries to change it into something that distorts some of the facts. I've experienced that in a time I was writing a story about an artist from America who was getting to stand inside the water for a whole full tidal cycle so that she could talk about the rising sea levels. And when I wrote that story and sent it to one of the editors, they changed it from rising sea levels to something like sea waves, sea tides, you know. Those are two different things. So there's also that aspect of information gap. because you've trained the journalist, you've left the editor, no, you've not trained the editor, you've not trained the editor, and at the end of the day, it's the editor who is going to decide how is this story going to appear on the newspaper, how is this story going to appear online, how is this story going to appear on radio. And also sometimes, because of media houses, I've talked about media houses, the revenue shrinking, you find that media houses sometimes have to do away with some stories. I remember sometimes in my capacity as an editor, I was forced to do away with a story, a very important story that talked about some children who had been banned because of, who had died in a fire because of a mistake from the national provider, from one of the energy providers in my country. And the reason why I had to do away with the story is because the energy provider was a very big advertising client for us. And at the same day, they had sent a very huge press release on something they had launched. So I was told, like, you have to pick you have to pick the story that's going to bring revenue to the station. So you see, those are some of the challenges that are facing. They are general challenges, but there are also challenges to do with women journalists. But the good thing is that there are opportunities. There are opportunities for women journalists if you are consistent, and if you're consistent on what you're doing, and if you make the stories matter. How do you make these stories matter? Do not just write on energy. Do not just write on environment. Link energy to topics like gender, because most women journalists are allocated soft topics like health, gender, entertainment. So you have to find, how do you link energy? How do you link environment? How do you link climate change? How do you link marine issues to these other topics that they have allocated to us as women journalists? How do you link climate change to gender? How do you link marine issues and issues about coral to gender? How do you link them to health issues? So that's the only way that the stories are going to get, they are going to be received, and they are going to get coverage, and we are going to be able to convince our editors. And like Lena said, I'm a Chevening scholar. I'm currently pursuing a master's degree in media and international development at the University of East Anglia. And I would say that I received this scholarship because I was able to, the scholarship is offered by the UK government, and you have to write 4 essays and apply when the scholarship window is open. I would say that I received this scholarship because I was able to convince them that there's a gap on women who are writing environment stories, and how is this gap contributing to people not understanding issues to do with environment in our country. So I was able to convince them through my essays, and they really liked my essays, and that's why they selected me. And aside from the scholarship, before I came, I was able to receive some grants from InfoNile, where I did a story on the endangered 𝘀𝗽𝗲𝗍 and how Kenya and Tanzania not agreeing on the conservation of, not having a common conservation plan for Lake 𝘀𝗽𝗲 was contributing to the declining of the 𝘀𝗽𝗲𝗍, which is in Taita Taveta and Kilimanjaro regions. And also another grant from the Earth Journalism Network, where I did a story on the trapping of, unregulated trapping of parrotfish. So I'd say that if you're consistent, if you keep writing these stories, you will get more ideas, and you will find, if you have a portfolio, you'll be able to convince someone who's offering an opportunity, or someone who is offering a grant, that indeed you can make it. But I would also like to throw a challenge to the women journalists here. So we know that there is a shortage of women journalists who are writing about environment, who are writing about climate change, who are writing about energy, who are writing about marine issues, who are writing about agriculture and environment. We know there's a shortage, but I would like to throw a challenge to you. If you know you are a woman journalist here, you can just take one female journalist, and try to mentor her, try to rope her in. Like, for example, I know in most media houses, they do receive interns. So you can take those interns and try to mentor them. How does reporting about an environment story, how does it work about? How do you go about it? Which are some of the major environment issues and the key pressing environment issues that they can write about? And when you do that, you'll find that we're going to be having more and more women and more female journalists writing such issues, bringing such issues, creating a link between gender and climate change, gender and marine pollution, gender and other issues. So we also have a role to mentor other journalists who come to us so that we can create a bigger network. Also, I would like to say that the other challenge that I faced as a journalist is that there were no opportunities that were specifically for women journalists to train on environment reporting. I was a member of several women media forums, like the African Women in Media and the Network for Media and PR Women in Kenya. But for the time I was there, I never saw any organization approach such groups to offer opportunities for training or for mentoring of women journalists. So I had to rely on being trained by male counterparts or trying to learn the ropes by myself, which sometimes can be very difficult because you'll get a report, you don't understand what this report is talking about. You'll get a story, you don't understand how to phrase this story. So you see, it's really hard. So, but if we can hold each other's hands, we hold the mentors' hands, and also these organizations like Climate Tracker, like the Earth Journalism Network, like Infonal, that are offering such opportunities, they can take advantage of this women in media network groups like the AWIM, and also Network for Media Women and Media and PR Women in Kenya, which is basically main in Kenya. So if we do that, I think we are good to go. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Janet. Thank you so much. And I just want to highlight one comment here by Christy from the UK, who's an environmental researcher and a journalism lecturer in the UK. They're asking if you have any recommendations for what they can do on an international level, like how they can help. So do you have any recommendations for for what can happen on the international level?
I think first of all, what we can change is they can offer training for not just journalists, editors too. You see, like what Climate Tracker is doing, you can train editors too, because it's not enough that women are being discriminated in the newsroom. When you're discriminated, you are approaching the editor with a topic that's not women unlikely. So you see, it becomes very hard. But if you can train these editors, you can get to them. And if you show, because women journalism is one of, environment journalism for women is a topic that seems like it does not have a lot of career prospects. So you find that also women are moving away. So when you're able to train more and more women journalists and women editors on environment, you're able to create like a path for other journalists to come and pass through. But right now, as it is right now, it's sort of like there's a blockage. You cannot get past where. So if they can offer more and more opportunities to train the editors, to train the media houses, to collaborate with media houses. I've seen some organization collaborate with media houses that I'm collaborating with you, and I want you to produce, like, maybe in 10 months, I want you to produce like a certain number of stories in environment and climate change, and I need like some of the stories done by women. So if you can offer such and such opportunities, this will challenge the editors more to give the opportunities to women journalists. Also, we can come in between, you can bring you can look on how to address the income gaps, because women journalists are more poorly paid than men journalists. That's a fact. So, and you see, writing an environment story takes a lot of time. It's not something that you're going to write in one day. You might take even 2 weeks writing one story, trying to research, because an environment story or an energy story is not a story that you can write. So if you can offer like a website where journalists can get like information, they can get sample of stories, information that is broken down in a way that a journalist can understand, because some of the times these reports you're trying to write stories from are too technical and you're wondering, what's this report talking about? You cannot see. So if you can like help break down this for us, it can really help, because even if I know that I'm being paid poorly, but I have a shot of like I'm not facing a lot of challenges, it will be easy for me to maneuver. But if I know that I'm being paid poorly and I'm finding these challenges, it becomes very easy for someone to give up, because at some point I also wanted to give up. Also on the issue of the income flows for media houses, I don't know how the international community can do that, but probably if you have like a funding model for media houses, I think that can help, because most journalists are being laid down from their jobs right now because of the funding model for media houses is changing, and women journalists are the most affected. So if we can have a way to look to find a funding model for media houses in such a way that they don't have to be reliant on advertising, because we know that media houses that do rely on advertising, they tend to be biased because they tend to favor the advertiser. So I think that can work, in my opinion.
Thank you so much, Janet. It was a pleasure to have you here with us, and it would be nice if you can stay because we might receive more questions. Now I would like to move to our final panel, which is also made up of two amazing journalists who were part of our previous programs hosted by Climate Tracker this year. First, I have with me Lydia from Kenya, who's a correspondent at the Standard Media Group. She was also one of the grant winners for Climate Tracker Fellowship this year, and her work was selected among the best 3 out of 20 in the continent. And she will be followed by Precious from Zambia, who's a development economist, climate action scholar, and gender advocate. Precious is a Mandela Washington Fellow, and she was selected in Climate Tracker Media Fellowship this year as well. So Lydia, I'll hand it over to you first. It would be nice if you can share with us your personal experience as a woman journalist in Kenya, and also some of the recommendations that you have with us.
Thank you, Lina. Like Lina said, my name is Lydia Nyawera. I've been a journalist for the last 8 years, based in Central Kenya. And I was part of the fellowship with the Climate Tracker. And honestly, I have to admit, this is a great opportunity for us to have a conversation about the role of women in environmental journalism, as well as the climate change. Now, one of the things that I noted, or that I have had a personal experience with, is that newsrooms are not necessarily designed to be accommodating to women, which is a challenge because honestly, this means that very few women make it past the entry-level positions. This is a challenge that means that as you go up into the management level of the newsroom, it becomes more difficult to find women who can support you and mentor you. And I'm glad that some of my colleagues within this webinar have mentioned that, because this more or less looks like it's impossible for you to have an interest not just in journalism itself, but also specifically in environmental journalism. Now, aside from having a very small number of female mentors within the newsroom, there's the issue of networking within the environment and climate change networks. If you don't know who you need to talk to for a story, then it's highly unlikely that you're going to reach out to them or have a well-researched article that you can defend to your editor or present to your editor. I'm glad that during the Climate Tracker fellowship, we got some training on how to pitch stories specifically towards climate change and environmentalism, because without that training, it's difficult for a journalist, especially a female journalist, to break the mold and get out of the niche and stereotypical story dockets that they are assigned most of the time. So this is key, because without networking, without networking, it's difficult for you to know who you need to talk to do your story. A lack of trainings, specifically for and resources to execute these stories. I'm glad that Janet brought it up in terms of the resources required for anyone, not just female journalists, but anyone to carry out a good, well-researched environmental story or a food story. It takes time and it takes money, both of which unfortunately are not available are not in enough supply when it comes to women journalists. Of course, you have to put into consideration that is time that you're taking away from what traditionally most media houses prefer to discuss, especially in Africa and in East Africa specifically, which is politics. You will note that most of our headlines and most of our big stories are often around politics. It's rare that you're going to find us discussing stories about the environment, which is why you're already at a disadvantage. You're in a niche where the likelihood of you getting your story published is very slim. And then on top of that, you're taking 2 weeks or 3 weeks to do one story. And then that one story, based on how much time you put into it, eats into your income. So funding is a key issue that I think should be looked into in terms of supporting women journalists. In my own experience, perhaps I can share this. I noted that because women journalists have more than just one role to play when they're in the newsroom. They also have their social responsibilities as mothers, as sisters, as wives. And one of the things is that when you're covering environmental journalism as well as climate journalism, you need to travel. You need to leave your home. You need to interact with people, and not just once, but maybe over a certain period of time. And I noticed that when I tried to push for such stories that I needed to leave home, I had to incur costs such as childcare. I had to incur costs in terms of making sure that everything, that the environment that I was living in was habitable. And that means I had to go out of pocket for something that my employer may not be willing to pay for. So these are some of the issues that I think hinder women from pursuing this. Because if you go to your employer and tell them, I need a certain amount of money to go and follow up a certain kind of story, they look at it as an expense without wondering why is it more expensive to take you there and it's cheaper to take her male colleague. So that often limits many women from choosing to travel and spend too much time on an environmental story. And this limits the number of women who can actually engage in it. Now, another experience I noted is that there are very many women in the agricultural sector who don't have a voice. And unfortunately, if more women don't get involved in discussing climate change and environmentalism and conservation, these women are the ones who are going to suffer the most. I think we as women journalists have a responsibility to give the voice to the women who silently are planting trees and having had to pick the coffee and not get recognized, pick tea and not get recognized. They're the ones who are tilling the land and growing the food, but the men take the credit. The men are the ones who are recognized by the cooperative societies. They're the ones who are recognized by the government. They're the ones who are getting funding by the banks. So it's unfortunate. It's something that we need to look into, because if we don't give women a voice and empower them, even in our current situation as women journalists facing the challenges that we are, women are still going to be the ones who are hardest hit when the resources such as land, such as water, such as air are destroyed. So I think this is something that it's like a rallying call that we cannot give up. Despite all the challenges that we face, we cannot give up, because telling these stories is important, not just for us, but for the women who are also key beneficiaries of us telling the truth about what's happening with climate change. I also find it important that I discuss the issue of misconceptions that only politics sells. I mean, only sensationalizing things sells. I think environmental stories can sell if we make it important for people to understand that these stories matter not just to a small niche of people, but to all of us. There is room for each and every one of us, not just as women journalists, but all journalists who are in the profession, to get involved in climate change. Rarely do we find that we have more than 2 or 3 environmental stories running in our national publications, specifically here in Kenya. And this is unfortunate, because the space is limited, is perceived to be limited, but it is not. I believe that there is enough room for each and every one of us, and we can create the platforms necessary for more women and more stories to be told about the environment, because at the end of the day, this is a responsibility not just for us as journalists, but also to us as women, to ensure that we have a way to communicate what very few people understand, that at the end of the day, women are going to suffer just in a disproportionate manner if the women journalists who are fighting the battle to stay in the newsroom refuse to or fail to keep fighting, or if we give up. So I'm glad that we've had a conversation about funding and training. This is key. My recommendations would be that we need to find ways to fund women specifically who are interested in pursuing these stories, so that we give them the tools they require to tell stories that impact the people they're talking about in a positive manner. Give them a voice, amplify them the same way they're amplifying their sources. And thank you so much for this. I'm looking forward to answering some of your questions. I give it back to Lina. Are you still there?
Yes, thank you so much, Lydia. That was very inspiring. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. And I just want to highlight that Lydia was one of the greatest fellows that we've had in one of our media fellowship programs this year. She's done amazing. And as I mentioned, her article was actually one of the best top 3 articles published within Climate Tracker programs. Now I would like to hand it over to Precious, who will also share her experience with us. Precious, are you here?
Thank you, Lina. I'm here. Greetings, everyone, and thank you, Lina, for the introduction. I think it's really wonderful that we have a forum like this one where we can get to discuss and share experiences with fellow female journalists across the continent. I think it's very timely and pertinent to have these discussions. So my experience as a female journalist in the climate change and environmental thematic area, I would say is double-edged. On the positive side, it's allowed me to engage in deeply insightful reporting, as climate change is interdisciplinary, and it requires, I would say, academic rigor and also a journalistic flair, so that you can not only disseminate the information, but educate the reader as well. And the fact that climate change is multifaceted, it's also given me great dynamics in my reporting, because I would say environmental issues, they're not just a philosophical problem, but it's also fundamentally an ethical, one would say political, scientific, and also economic problem. And some of the rewarding experiences thus far, I would say, is the Climate Tracker Sustainability Diets Fellowship. And I'd say that because I believe journalism is a never-ending growth curve, and one has to continuously learn. And through the Climate Tracker Fellowship, I've truly learned a lot, and it was truly a great experience. But on the other side, I'll try and now highlight the challenges. I'd say I've been facing, and I've faced increasingly a lot of challenges in the thematic area of climate change and environmental issues. Firstly, because it's male-dominated, and it brings with it societal norms and cultural limitations that give forth this notion of inequality in this area, and makes it more like a natural concept. For example, in my country, in Zambia, high-impact climate change stories, for example, like the current energy deficiency we're facing, and load shedding, and tabled policies and resources and strategies that the government tries to implement, as seen to be a jurisdiction for male journalists, and most of them are male journalists that cover these stories. And sadly, I would say this scenario is perpetuated on 2 fronts, both on the women and the males. For the women, there's this mentality that's carried on, that the fact that the climate change space is a dominant group for male journalists, female points of view as scarce, and they're considered less competent. And most of the male journalists try to hold this space for them to maintain their voice. And that usually leaves female environmental journalists like myself muffled and usually invisible in this space, or most of the times overlooked. The other challenge I would say that I've come across, and I think is very prevalent, is the bias on the subject and the source. So most of the women journalists are made to anchor soft beats and programs that are usually maybe fashion, entertainment, and feature stories, and rarely are hard news stories given, or environmental news stories. In fact, I think it was probably a month ago, I was trying to just look at the statistics in Zambia of other female journalists and the thematic areas that they're looking at. Over 50% of the news reporting and anchoring is on women in empowerment, fashion, entertainment, and environmental issues and other climate change issues are probably in a maximum of 20%. The only other thematic area around that range is sport. And also the other challenge I've encountered is on the source bias. You find that even as you go out trying to get information, you find that female sources are also very passive and don't want to be outspoken. I'll give an example of an article I did with Climate Tracker, the one we did on our fellowship, where I was looking at COVID-19 impact on climate change and food security. I interviewed several small-scale female farmers, and they had such rich information and were willing to talk, but in the background, they couldn't even allow me to have their picture in the newspaper because they were saying, no, I need to get permission from my husband. He won't want me to be there. So even on the sources, it's just not in the subject matter as a journalist investigating the stories, but even the sources, the female sources are very shy to have their stories out there. And I think cultural norms and stereotypical gender roles feed into that behavior. And apart from that, I feel that it's also led to a patriarchy in the journalism field and sexism on different fronts from my own experiences. You find that even though the journalism field in Zambia has many females, there's still very few female journalists in decision-making positions and other influential positions. And this just shows that this patriarchy has extended to the newsroom. Because it's even sad to note that in Zambia, the first time we had an editor-in-chief was only in the year 2000. That was our first editor-in-chief. So that already shows the great inequality in the journalism area. Another challenge I've encountered, I think, is also the political influence. I would say there's coveted censoring in stories, and most newspaper outlets want to carry stories that paint the government of the day in a good light, and environmental stories usually take a back end and not much focus is given to them. Though maybe it'll be good for me to share probably a positive outcome of the power of media, particularly in the environmental sphere, and how it was able to make the political party of the day accountable for their flaws in environmental policies. In 2019, the government of Zambia wanted to put a copper mine in one of the largest and most beautiful national parks, which is the Lower Zambezi National Parks. And I think it's the power of media that brought this to light and got everyone on board, and petitions were signed. And I'd say that just highlighted the power of media at the end of it all. And the copper mine was halted from being constructed in the park. I think the other challenge, and which I feel is the bedrock and probably one of the main issues in why we are in a position where the very few female journalists, is our education system. So topics such as environment, climate change are not really encouraged for most of female students in tertiary education, and they're told to probably focus on softer topics. And I think we we should try and push a focus for young journalists, particularly in tertiary institutions, to make a focus on environmental issues and other STEM topics as well, before this slips into the workplace as we're actually facing now, to make them have that passion while they're still in their formative years. The other challenges that I've come across as well is lack of mentorship and networking. You find that very few female environmental journalists in Zambia, and very few, I'll probably say zero networking opportunities. The other void as well, I think, is data and information in the public domain. And I think I've been hearing that across with other journalists as well. There's really a lack of information and open source as well, where you can just gather this information. And I think it's something that we can also easily implement and maybe come up with an independent data source that we could all utilize. The last one I would say is probably funding and harassment from sources as well. You find being a female journalist, when you're trying to get information, some people will try and take that opportunity to pass very unprofessional comments. Some of the solutions and recommendations that I have taken note of, and some that have been already shared on the forum, but maybe I could just quickly touch on them, the ones that have already been shared on, and some that I've written. The first I would say is more opportunities for human resource and capacity building in the climate change space and environment. There is a drive, if you talk to a lot of journalists, there's a female journalist, there's a drive to want to understand, to want to learn, but there are no opportunities for this capacity building. One thing that Climate Tracker rolled out, the fellowships, I feel was very beneficial, and it'll be wonderful if it could be rolled out to more other countries, so that other female journalists could be afforded the same opportunity. Probably another proposal I'd say is if Climate Tracker could link with newspaper outlets in the countries, and maybe probably discuss with them some form of affirmative action, where if they could work with the newspaper outlets on collaborative projects and trainings, but ensure that a certain quota of the trainees are actually female journalists. The other recommendation I would put forward is gender mainstreaming and a gendered innovative lens during trainings, and also during reporting of stories. If you look at energy issues, most of the climate change issues in terms of the people that will feel the brunt effects of change in the environment are actually women, but very few times do you find stories that are put across and bring out this gendered aspect. The other recommendation, which I think is vital, is mentorship, and the mentorship should be on two fronts. Of course, it's very important to get a mentee, like for us to be afforded this fellowship, to get a mentee in which you can share your learnings with, but it's also important to also find a mentor as well, someone who's paved the way in the sphere. So I think mentorship should also be encouraged, but also on two fronts. Someone you can lift up and share your learnings, but also someone that can pull you up in your profession as well. I think the other one that I had highlighted before, but probably it can never be overemphasized, is an open data source, which I think is very vital to get real-time data and be able to share learnings with one another. Probably that could also be linked with funding sources. And one of the things that probably is coming up more profound is this inequality in the journalism profession. But I feel to look at it and only discuss it as female journalists will be futile if we don't bring on board male journalists as well. So I think one of the recommendations is also to have this open discussion and encourage male journalists to work collaboratively with other female journalists on environmental issues, including media owners and editors as well. I think those are my recommendations. And lastly, I'll just say, as journalism, I feel we're rooted in the fight for decency, equality on all facets, and it would be a dishonor if we don't manage to bring this in our own practice and our own tradition in our profession. Thank you, Lena. I think that is
Thank
all.
you so much, Precious. Thank you so much for these also recommendations. We'll make sure to note all of them. And as I mentioned, this webinar, the whole purpose of this webinar is that we want, as Climate Tracker, we want to reflect on what we work on and how we work and how we can make it better in future programs in terms of gender integration in our programs. And we're hoping that this webinar can also benefit other organizations working in these fields in order to also be conscious of how they are integrating women in their trainings, conferences, online mentorship, and so on. So thank you, Precious. That was really amazing. I have one question here for Lydia. So someone is asking, how do you overcome the challenges that you face, and what would be your advice for women who are just starting their journalism career?
The question is for me?
Yes.
All right. I never gave up. You have to be persistent. And then you also have to find your niche and then know your stuff. Because one of the challenges is that if you're working in an environment that expects you to already know more than you do. So do your research and create a kind of understanding of what you're trying to pitch as stories and ideas. That was how I went about it for me personally. I tried to make sure I found my niche in agriculture, I found my niche in feature writing, and then after that, identify people who you can work with and collaborate with, not just within where you are, but also outside your normal networks. This is going to help you open up and understand opportunities and also help you understand outside of what you already know. And then for journalists who start just starting out, many people will say keep your head down, but I don't think keeping your head down, because already the thing about journalism is that you're there to stand out. You're there to tell a story and you cannot be shy about it. You have to be brave, you have to be courageous, and then you have to be persistent. And then if you're not persistent, every time you face a challenge, you're going to have, every time you hear no, you're going to give up. So you're going to hear a lot of no's, and you're going to hear a lot of people tell you, but you're a woman, but why are you doing this? Why don't you try something simpler? Why don't you find another career, go into something less combative, less abrasive, go into an environment that's less pressure. But you have to consistently do well, consistently keep trying to do better than you did yesterday. One of my editors used to keep saying, you're only as good as your last story, which means don't just look back at what you've accomplished, keep looking forward at what you can accomplish and the people that you can impact. So don't give up, don't give up. For any young journalists, create a niche and don't give up, no matter how many no's you hear.
Thank you so much, Lydia. This is very inspiring. I really appreciate it. And finally, for Precious, I want to ask, so as someone who works as a freelance journalist, how have you managed to convince editors to publish your articles when they're not interested in it? So I'm particularly interested in your experience on the Climate Tracker Fellowship, which I remember was a very also niche article. So how did you manage to overcome the challenge of editors not being interested in your story? Precious, are you with us?
Hello, Lena, could you just repeat the question? I think I lost you a bit there.
Okay, sorry. So someone is asking, how do you, as a freelance journalist, how do you overcome the challenge of editors not being interested in your stories when they are on niche topic? So like environmental related topic and the article that you mentioned that you worked with Climate Tracker. So how do you convince editors?
Thank you. It's an uphill battle, but it's one that you get to the top with. Firstly, I think you need to make the editors see why your story is timely and why it's newsworthy. You need to, because the topic is very niche, and it's not, it doesn't always easily make the front pages, but you need to just show its relevance. Don't be too abstract with it and probably just detailing statistics. It's very, very, very important to make it very catchy, very, I would say timely and pertinent. You need to, and one thing to add, being a freelance journalist is not as bad as a bad rap is made out to be. In fact, it makes you more malleable, more able to be, I would say, objective. And my only 2 points to give you is show why it's timely, show why it's pertinent, and give points why someone will be able to read it and find it interesting. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you so much, Precious. Thank you for joining us. And so we're reaching the end of our event. I'm really happy with the level of engagement on our chat. And I really appreciate all of our speakers for sharing their personal experience, which is very interesting to hear. And honestly, I would love if we all can connect. So if anyone here wants to connect with some of the speakers, wants to share more information they have, or want to collaborate, please reach out to me. You have my email, so please reach out to me and I can connect you with any of the speakers who joined us today. And finally, I want to go back to Merit from Hivos, just to reflect on what has been discussed and to also give the closing remarks. Merit, are you still with us?
Yes, I am. Yeah, thank you all so much for the valuable contributions. It was really insightful, and it definitely helps us in Climate Tracker as well, I think, in future planning. And it's really difficult to capture such a rich conversation. So I want to apologize before if I'm missing out on important aspects, but I try my best. So there's a couple of things that I heard and that really stand out. The first I would say is that it's really important to fight stereotypes and prejudice about women, but also about environment stories and climate change stories. So energy, for instance, it's not a technical issue. It's not a men's issue alone. It's linked to health, gender. It's usually, or it's often about a human story. So in that sense, it's perfectly fit for women journalists to report about it. On that, I think it's important to train, or what I heard is important, is to train editors on environment, but also on gender issues. And at the same time, also empower women to become editors and try to get them in decision-making positions in newsrooms. But to fight these prejudices, and it's also important, and then I come to my second point, is to empower women and gain interest of women to report on environmental issues. For that, using role models as mentors, but also women to use their unique selling point and stand out is important. Women often bring something extra, so use that. And for instance, women also give women a voice. So if you do a feature story about the impact of lack of energy access, for instance, on women, it's a woman journalist that can actually voice those concerns best. Then to empower women, education is important. It was mentioned quite a lot, training, capacity building on the topic of environment and climate, but also on how to pitch, for instance, their stories to editors. What I've heard as well a couple of times is that it is important to create partnerships and networks of women journalists. And there's quite some organizations, I think, in Africa that are basically a network of women journalists. So reaching out to them could be important and helpful. Also, what was an ask from a lot of the speakers is to increase the possibilities for women journalists, like for instance what we did together with Climate Tracker on the fellowship, but really encourage women to apply. So that's one that I take from this conversation as well. And then my third point that I heard is that there's quite a big lack of resources and data. I heard somebody saying about that it's important to have open data source between journalists and that they can share information, but also important to use women as a source, basically. So to have women experts featured in stories, but also other women. And I think one of the things that I take as well for Hivos is that Hivos and other organizations like us can really help on opening doors to these experts, but also opening doors to, for instance, government officials or really interesting data from experts. So I think those are the three main points that I got out. So fighting stereotypes, empower women, and really work on that data aspect. Yeah, thank you again to all the participants. And I think this one is recorded, right, Lina?
Yes.
So I give it back to you to really wrap it up.
Thank you so much, Merit, and thank you all for joining us. For those of you who have joined late, this webinar was actually recorded and we will be uploading it shortly after. So if you want to watch the session again, feel free to do so. And I really want to thank all the speakers because all of you have shared unique experiences and really interesting stories that really benefit us as Climate Tracker and gives us a wider perspective into what we can do better. And this is exactly what we're aiming for in our future programs. And also, I think Hivos and other international organizations can benefit from these kind of recommendations. So we're aiming as Climate Tracker to also publish a summary of this webinar, including all the recommendation points that was mentioned by the guest speakers, and then hopefully transform this into an action toolkit that we can utilize in our future programs and potentially share it with other organizations that work in similar fields. So I really want to thank all of you again. And as I mentioned, we really like to link people up and we really like to create collaborations. So if anyone is interested in linking up with the speakers, please reach out to me and I will do so. And yeah, thank you all for staying on time and for joining our webinar. Thank you so much.